Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. How you doing, Joe? How were your
Good.
holidays?
They were a lot of fun. We did a little staycation here with the kids, and I think they enjoyed that a lot. So we've been trying to move away from buying a lot of presents,
Nice.
which inevitably end up just being garbage, and focusing on experiences.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of fun. How about yourself?
I was pretty good. Just a very quiet holiday spent with a couple of family members, but tried to keep that to a minimum for obvious reasons. So,
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely not how it used to be, but you deal with the holiday in front of you, I guess as the saying goes. So
yep. Yeah. And hopefully next year will be a very different story. So,
let's hope so.
yeah.
So
Just
yeah,
wanted
on,
to,
on that note too, I think we want to talk about next year, some of the big themes, some of the trends that we're seeing in data, and maybe what we think is going to happen in 2021 and probably beyond as well. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's cool too because I think every year you can make some interesting predictions, but I think this year, to be quite frank, the pandemic has kind of upended a lot of things in the market. And so we'll kind of talk about what that portends for next year and thereafter as well.
yeah, I'd say when we started 2020, it seemed like everything was in a pretty steady state. People were making sales. March came along around mid-March. The Obviously everyone knows what happened there. Everything, it's like the floor fell out from underneath you, and everything was in free fall. And I think that went on for about a good month, and um, then we started noticing things were stabilizing, and not just stabilizing, but there was a flurry of activity um, in the data space that I know I hadn't seen before. I think it's companies finally realized they needed to start making investments, um, in technology, and we can get more into that in a bit. At the same time, we also saw a lot of people, choosing to, uh, invest in more in their skills, right? And data being a hot thing, people decided to focus on data skills. So we can kind of break out our trends and themes into two big major buckets. It's kind of education and kind of where we see things going there, and the talent pipeline as a result, and also tools and technologies. So you want to start out with education and talent?
Yeah, let's start out with that. I mean, and some of the stuff we're going to talk about today for this YouTube discussion is going to be maybe a bit more qualitative, and then we are planning to put together a blog post as well that will get into more of the statistical details and such. But one of the things that's been the case for a long time is that the data science space has been a lot more conservative about education than the software development space. So, of course, your big Silicon Valley major tech companies like Google always like to hire people out of Berkeley and Stanford with very traditional computer science education. But it's also been the case that you could go through a code school or you could just get experience on your own and you could get a great job and have a great career by doing that. And the ML and data science space tended to be much more biased toward people with educations in math, in statistics, and computer science. Like they really wanted you to have that piece of paper and that credential before they were willing to hire you. And I think that's been gradually eroding. And I think it's really going to erode a lot in this coming year. And you said before that the data space is probably 3 to 5 years behind software development in terms of these organizational trends. And I think that's probably true, but we're probably at a turning point now where the whole space becomes a lot more accepting of people without as much formal education who just demonstrate their skills and develop them on the job and through independent study and through mentorship, and then just have a phenomenal career from there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. To add to that, there's going to be a trend where people from non-traditional backgrounds, i.e., if you're not a STEM major, I think you're going to see more people with those backgrounds getting into data science as well. Data engineering, I think, is maybe a slightly different discipline, although I think you're also going to see people getting into data engineering as well. Just the data field in general, there's a talent shortage, and because there's a talent shortage, there's a lot of money, and money is a honeypot for people. It's pretty simple economics, and so you're going to see, I think, a lot more interest from a variety of talents. And I think that's great. What the field needs a lot of is diversity. So
Yeah, that's true. And I think part of what we've seen is that people who get really great data science and ML experience, say working in marketing, are now highly coveted because they have a combination of tech skills that they developed on the job and through their own study with just domain expertise that you're not going to get through a formal education program. You're going to have to get it somewhere.
Hmm. And also, COVID, I think when it first came on the scene and colleges were moving to online only, there was I think some people, like your Scott Galloways of the world, were predicting the end of college, um, and maybe there's something to it. I mean, I think if anything, people realize that paying for an online version of the in-class experience is pretty expensive. And we also teach at a university, so I think we know which we say. Our class, obviously, we made it online native from day one because that was our option. But
Yep.
I think we were very sensitive to the needs of students as well, where we tried to make it online native. We didn't expect to do like a 3-hour lecture like you would at an in-person class, and you know a lot more about lecturing than I do. But I would say students, though, they're definitely looking at the price tag of these institutions and saying, "Well, okay, is this worth it, or um, can I learn the same things elsewhere?" And I think we'll see where the shakeout is. I know in our department we saw record enrollment, so
Yeah.
there's also that, right? So that's in the information systems department, and um, but that's one data point, and it'll be interesting to see over the next year what enrollment looks like. Recessions do always, uh, they historically have always had people go back to school. Obviously, a pandemic is a different situation than a recession. But regardless, interest in data skills, I don't think that's ever going to lag, especially in 2021. So,
Yeah, completely agree. And I like that you use the word shakeout. And that when I think about the education space, it's kind of at this unstable point where something has to change. And people have pointed out for years and years before the pandemic that the rate of tuition growth, for example, was not sustainable, and the rate of student debt growth was not sustainable. And so I think we are going to see big changes. I'm not comfortable trying to predict what those are going to be, but a lot of things are going to change in, say, the next 5 years somehow. And I'll be very curious to watch where the dust settles.
oh yeah, yeah, I know with my kids, being a parent, that's top of mind. But then there's always a kind of a lingering question in the back of your head: is there even
Yeah.
going to be college in 10 years? I think with the rise of the MOOCs back in the early 2010s, I think that was probably more of a serious question, where you kind of had this debate where maybe MOOCs are going to take over the world and so forth. I
Right.
think that's been answered. They aren't.
Right.
But at the same time, that definitely allows for more options for people to learn data skills. It's not like you have to go to a university in person to do this. You could go to Georgia Tech online actually through Coursera and get a full CS master's degree from Georgia Tech, which is pretty awesome. I think for like 10,000 bucks or something. Don't quote me on that, but absurdly cheap. But regardless, yeah, the trend for 2021 is definitely more people leveling up their data skills. I don't see that not happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, my advice to my nieces and nephew is if you can get away with it, get a liberal arts education. In other words, study something that's interesting to you, but learn enough math and computer science that if you want to have a tech career to pay the bills, you have that option.
Hmm.
I don't think your education necessarily has to be right in the data or software development space. I think, as we just discussed, it's getting easier and easier to get into the space if you have kind of the baseline skills, if you have
Hmm.
enough of a sort of a handhold to develop from and really build a career off of. And it might take several years, but you have the opportunity to develop a career that pays well and will pay your bills and still have this diversity of education that you can carry forward for your lifetime.
Yeah, it's a really good call. Yeah, at the end of the day, people will invest in themselves, and that's awesome. And the other cool thing too is that we're seeing universities starting to emphasize uh, achieving cloud certifications, for example. That's something I don't
Yeah.
think was around even a few years ago. So I know at our school, the University of Utah, it's if it hasn't been rolled out, it soon will, where students can work for an AWS cert, for example. That's pretty cool. I mean, those certs are worth a lot of money. I will be curious to see what happens with certificate dilution in the marketplace. But again, these certs aren't easy, so it's not like you're going to see a ton of people pass them. I mean, these are hard certs, so if you can pass them, great. But I think giving people the visibility that these certs even exist and the opportunity to obtain them is great. So
Yeah, and I think if anything, we're still seeing dramatic under certification for people's job roles. So by that I mean that you have people running cloud teams, doing network engineering for cloud, who are very competent, but they haven't gotten certified yet. And so they do have blind spots. And I think any company who's looking at getting into the cloud or that's already has a cloud footprint should be looking at getting more of their people certified, just to have that knowledge base that will prevent a lot of problems and allow projects to move much faster in a more streamlined fashion as they continue to grow that footprint.
yeah, it's true. And I know like Amazon, they wanted to, get what was it, 24 or 29 million people cloud ready, given cloud skills. So I think anything can help. I mean, if AWS is willing to invest that money, they realize the talent gap pretty immediately, because that's a small country. So
Exactly. Yeah. So the fact that you see it's kind of expected on GCP and maybe even Azure that you'll have under certification, but the fact that it's still an issue on AWS indicates that we have a long way to go in terms of getting people certified. But
mhm.
I think by the same token, the cloud vendors also recognize that maybe they need more specialized certifications for different types of job roles. And so we saw Google roll out a huge number of certifications in the last year. And I think Amazon has evolved their pool of certs in the last 2 years as well, just
Yeah,
recognize the misalignment of needs versus what they were actually offering.
yeah. Same with Azure. And, we'll watch the space continually evolve as well.
Yep.
I think certs still have sort of a bad rap in some circles, and I think somewhat justifiably so. There's the certification industrial complex that wants you to get a cert, but maybe the cert's like totally baloney. I think both of us agree that the cloud certs, since we've obtained many of these, um, they aren't baloney. They have market value and they're difficult. So it's not like you're signing up, to pass some like kind of softball exam. I think far from it. If you can pass these exams and you got cloud skills, at least the semblance of cloud skills. So you still need actual experience, um,
But
but
yeah,
yeah,
this is have an impact on your day-to-day work. Once you have these certs, you recognize like, oh, I see this new problem and I know a pattern that works well for this. And I didn't really know that before, even though I could play around in the AWS console and spin things up. And looping back to the discussion of traditional computer science education, I think it's still really valuable. Like you learn invaluable ways of thinking about problems and developing code. And you have this really nice foundation, but in terms of your day-to-day, a cloud cert is still going to have a really nice positive impact on your career and your ability to do work for your employer.
yeah, for sure. So I think on the note of the cloud, let's talk about some of the trends in 2021 that we see with tools and technologies.
Yeah, I think we'll start with cloud in general, and we considered this one kind of softball, right? The idea that migration is going to continue growing,
Right?
migration.
It's
But
like,
I think the thing we should add to that is that based on a number of our clients and people in our communities, we saw a big acceleration in cloud adoption, specifically due to the pandemic. And I don't think that's going to slow down. And so it probably means that the pace of cloud growth will just be faster for the next several years. Somehow the pandemic lit that fuse. Companies that were considering moving away from certain assets and maybe going through a couple of renewal cycles before they did that fully just bit the bullet and accelerated the process because of all the uncertainty around the pandemic. It's interesting. I mean, certain types of investments were held back because of all the economic uncertainty, but committing to like long-term server purchases and stuff, that seemed to take a huge hit with all of the clients we were working with. And so they had no choice but to move to more ephemeral assets in the cloud.
hmm yeah, it made a lot of sense. The flexibility of the cloud gave you more control over your expenditures. I think it depends on the company, but I would be wagering to guess that like large amounts of capital expenditures, server rooms and data centers may not have been as palatable as they might have been before the pandemic. Having the flexibility of cost control in the cloud is very attractive, and this is represented in the types of clients that we work with. If anything, as you pointed out, the pandemic accelerated, i.e., pulled in, the number of customers that were going to move to the cloud at some point in the next maybe 5 years, for argument's sake.
Yeah.
So now that's happened, we always had this sort of number in the back of our head or numbers. It was, the number of companies that had moved to the cloud pre-pandemic, I think was anywhere from 5 to 25%, depending on what number you look at, but it was low, right? It wasn't the majority, even though like people like you and I tend to think that everybody's in the cloud. Like it's certainly not the case, when you zoom out. And so I'm not sure what the existing number of companies are that have made some effort to move into the cloud, but by all appearances, it's definitely grown and will continue to grow. But and this also does not include the number of startups that will be forming during the pandemic.
To address problems.
Those are net new migrations that weren't even in that 5 to 25% number, right? These are just brand new companies that are cloud native from day one.
Yeah.
So that also provides a, sort of an incentive for these, let's say on-prem companies to move to the cloud, because guess who you get to compete with? These cloud native, digital native companies that are going to move extremely fast.
Yeah.
And know what they're doing from day one.
Right.
Oh, what's that?
Oh, and another big impactor on this is the remote work trend.
Big time.
I've seen that with a couple of clients where quite often, it's not always the case, but quite often companies have some kind of data center where people are working. So they have an office, and then they have, part of their footprint is within that same building. Well, if you're looking at downsizing that office, then maybe keeping that data center around is not so palatable anymore. Might as well just close out the office and the data center if you can get away with it.
Yeah, I think a big questions, our big question is sort of which clouds are going to continue growing their share. Amazon continues to grow as a company, but there's Azure and Google Cloud in the mix, and I think we're both curious to see which clouds are going to be shifting positions. Google's getting a lot of traction. The growth rates have been impressive, but when you kind of zoom out and look at the total revenue sizes, they're still a fraction of what AWS or Azure are. I think we're starting to see a ton of movement in Azure.
Yep.
A lot of companies are looking at their on-prem Windows installations, and again, we always call these dark matter companies because they're just most of the known universe out there is on-prem, and they happen to be running Windows. And Azure makes it incredibly simple to move. So the thing I'm personally most curious about is like how many Microsoft workloads is Azure going to obtain net new or steal away from AWS.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I suspect we're going to see big growth in Office 365 as well, which is, a fully managed SaaS product. But if you're going to Office 365 in the cloud, then you might just be incentivized to move more of your infrastructure workloads to Azure just for alignment purposes.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So that's going to be fascinating to watch. And, we've been diving into Azure, I'd say a fair bit recently, and it's a great cloud. There's a lot to like about it. So this will be something to keep an eye on. So yeah, we'll need to regroup on this question really, and it's more of a trend and a theme. I don't know that it's a prediction so much because we haven't predicted anything, but it's but the other areas that I think we need to talk about are analytics and machine learning. We can start with analytics. What are some trends in 2021 we'll be seeing with analytics?
Yeah, analytics is an interesting one because I think there's been a steady growth curve for like business intelligence for many years. And yet, from our day-to-day perspective, business intelligence was a mature area. You had some major players, and they tended to try to grab market share from each other. But it wasn't viewed as this huge growth sector the way cloud is or the way machine learning is. But based on from what we've heard from these vendors, the pandemic drove this huge investment, this huge additional investment in business intelligence that wasn't there before, which suggests that before the pandemic, a lot of companies had underinvested in BI, and all of a sudden, the world no longer made sense. I mean, they didn't know who their customer was anymore. They didn't know who would want to buy their product when everyone was locked down. And so they needed to get those insights very quickly, and they spent a lot of money to do that. And the question is, will that growth trend continue after the pandemic? It'll be very interesting to watch, or if we see then a pullback in business intelligence spending after this is all over.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it seems like, if you there's really two big areas here. You have your dashboarding tools, And then you have your underlying analytics infrastructure, right? So that's your typically your data warehouses, your data lakes. And this year, late this year, we had Snowflake's IPO, for example. That was, just a giant nuclear bomb went off in the analytics industry. Uh, so curious to see what they do to, I would say keep pace with competitors as well as, to be frank, justify a very rich valuation.
Right.
So, it's, I'm sure they're going to do some, some cool stuff. They're they're in it to win it, and I think by all accounts, Snowflake's out there just kicking ass. And it's put a lot of other companies on notice, which means also you're going to see a lot more progressions with the big three cloud vendors and their offerings. I think that's going to be a big trend. Not sure specifically what. You could see it sort of going on at reInvent this year with Redshift, where they made some improvements there. They're definitely trying to catch up with Snowflake. Being able to read JSON within Redshift is a new advancement. Machine learning in Redshift, which we'll talk more about in a bit. Other vendors, Databricks is trying to push Lakehouse, which may or may not be a new paradigm. Whenever I see a vendor trying to push a new paradigm, it's sort of a question of how much of this is vendor driven versus how much of this is consumer driven, and then does it solve a real problem, or is this just a way of, sort of, putting lipstick on a pig? Don't have an opinion either way about Lakehouse. Could end up being a great paradigm, could not, but then you see things like Firebolt, right?
Yep.
Brand new data warehouse that came out, just announced their funding recently, and they have Snowflake directly in their sites, right? And these are guys from, I think, Sisense is where they're from, and so they have deep experience. And so this is a trend that we keep seeing over and over, where the analytics, data warehousing for a long time, and reporting, as you pointed out, when we did this, when we started this talk about analytics, it was kind of a mature space, and then all of a sudden, I would say in the last, couple of years, 3 years, whatever number. It's become a red hot space. So,
Yeah, and I think there are open questions about whether data warehousing might move to more of an open source model. I would say of all of SaaS products, the data warehousing sector is one of the most dominated by proprietary products. The best data warehouses right now are proprietary. And so if we can see someone finally fully unlock the space to some kind of an open source model where the data can be shared in a data lake, and yet you still have the performance that you get from a proprietary solution like a Snowflake or BigQuery or Redshift, that starts to get really interesting. And I think a number of companies are trying to do this.
but then you see the big three clouds, though, kneecapping the open source projects too.
Yep.
So anytime you start an open source project, that's successful, you're probably going to get funding to start a company around it to provide managed services and better services. And inevitably, if you're too popular, you're going to see a cloud come and mimic you. I mean, we see this all the time. So and it's kind of, and it's funny too, because even the proprietary data warehouses like Snowflake, they're partners with all the big three clouds, and it's fun to watch. I think AWS try and keep up with Snowflake, while Snowflake also pays AWS. So, yeah, so it's an interesting dilemma. I'm glad we get to have kind of ringside seats to all this. It's fun to watch, and I'd say that the theme is that the analytics space is going to heat up in both the dashboarding and the infrastructure side. Where it ends up, who knows? I mean, one big trend that we're seeing as well is analytics engineering. Where you make the analyst the engineer, right? So this is a movement that kind of started a few years ago. I think DBT is the one that put it squarely on the map, where before you had analytics infrastructure was basically kind of drag and drop GUI based workflows, right? Writing code was very labor intensive and so forth. DBT came around and made it so that an analyst could write transformation workflows using select statements. That's pretty dang cool. So,
yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think I think in general, there's a trend toward trying to deliver new analytics to consumers more quickly. And traditionally, data warehousing was a very small, low moving space. So in addition to your actual data warehouse, you had to have DBAs, you had to have ETL developers, and it would often take you 6 months to get a new column delivered, for example. And I
Hmm.
think to your point, this trend of analytics engineering is partially about saying, hey, we're in a more flexible environment. BigQuery or Snowflake is way, way more flexible than Teradata because I can scale it up and down anytime I want to. I don't have to buy a brand new system to double my storage, for example. And that means that I can quickly produce new analytics, but I need like a new infrastructure, new teams, new processes to enable that. And I think that's what we're really going to see delivered longer term from analytics engineering. It's just a
Yeah,
faster pace of time to value.
exactly. And also, I would say, critical things that had been missing in a lot of workflows too, data quality, data governance, all these things are now available as code, right? Great expectations, terrific project, terrific product. Shout out to the Great Expectations team.
Yeah.
They're leading the charge on the data quality end of things, right? Making sure you have good data. And I think you're just going to keep seeing more and more of these types of projects popping up. Analytics engineering is definitely, I would say, the big trend in analytics for 2021 and beyond. And what I'll find interesting is to see, okay, so you have GUI based products like Matillions and on one hand, or um, and I'd say proprietary solutions like Fivetran. And on the other hand, you have more code based solutions. And which ones are going to get more traction? So I think that's a trend that deserves paying close attention to.
Right. And part of it is just organizational processes too. I mean, in our notes, we talk about ML ops and data ops as well. We've been talking about data ops for a while now. And moving back to data quality, the reality is that in many cases, people who consume the data from a data warehouse or the ETL developers or the DBAs already know about data quality issues, but the processes are not in place to fix those quickly. And DevOps, of course, was developed to solve these kinds of quality defect issues in the software space. And I think we're going to see those process changes happen in the data world as well. So that
Mm-hmm.
changes be delivered very quickly instead of taking 6 months to solve a data problem or forcing analysts to write SQL to get around a data quality issue. You'll see, fixes delivered maybe in a week or something like this anytime a new issue arises.
Yeah. I think maybe if we were to recap, maybe the big trend of 2021 is actually just data becomes ops, and that's like ML ops, data ops, whatever else you want, the analytics ops, yada yada yada. Just starting to make up terms at this point, but the whole notion is like operations comes front and center. I think
Right.
that's a fair point.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, if we want to talk about any trends in machine learning.
Yeah, I mean, I think we both believe that we're going to see more managed ML products coming out, and hopefully more of a focus on just business value as opposed to there's still, I think, kind of a hobbyist culture in ML and data science, and that sometimes has given the sector a bad name. A company will hire a very expensive data science team and just not see much value delivered because they get kind of focused on almost research problems or on code hacking and not actually figuring out how to serve the business well. And so I think the combination of managed ML plus hopefully an organizational focus on what can be delivered to the business quickly will stand the sector in good stead.
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely a good maturity, I would say, from a few years ago, where everyone was focused on model training. I think that's, as we discussed earlier, that's becoming pretty old hat at this point.
Right.
Either you can use AutoML, pre-trained models, or there's so many libraries to train a model. I mean, I'd say if you're still focusing on that, you're really missing out on like the several dozen other things that you should be looking at. So mainly, how do you productionize your machine learning pipelines? So
Exactly.
it's interesting. I mean, we talk to companies all the time. I think in the ML ops space, this is, for people who aren't aware of ML ops, um, new buzzword, important buzzword. It's basically, you know, the infrastructure and practices around creating and deploying machine learning models. So it's not the actual model training; it's everything else that facilitates this. and the disciplines around it. Just as you had DevOps and software back in the day, just as you have data ops right now, analytics ops. You also have ML ops. And so this is, I think you're going to see the big trend in machine learning is ML ops in 2021. There's a lot of companies, I would say, in the space, as I was kind of alluding to just a few seconds ago, where there are a bajillion managed ML and ML ops startups right now, all ran by insanely smart, qualified people, and many of whom have raised VC money, right? So this is going to be very fascinating to watch. This is by no means over. It feels like it's just getting started. So there's no clear winner because there's no consolidation yet. So if there's no consolidation and no clear winner, it's anybody's race to win. So
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, you look at how long it took software processes to really mature for us to have modern things like virtual machines and version control and DevOps processes and such. The data space, I mean, data warehousing has been around for a long time, but the ML space is still very new. And so on the one hand, it's going to take time for it to mature. On the other hand, it can bypass a lot of the growing pains by just learning from what has happened on the software side.
yeah, yeah. There's been a lot of learnings on the software side, and yeah, you can already reappropriate that experience curve. So hopefully things are a lot shorter in terms of delivery. Um, and I think this is exemplified too at reInvent just a few weeks ago. AWS announced a whole slew of ML ops products, right? So there's like CI/CD, feature stores, data wrangling, bias detection, and like a ton of other stuff. And so it's a recognition, I think, on AWS's part that whereas SageMaker a couple of years ago was simply a way to train models and maybe deploy it, there's a lot more that goes in that universe. I know GCP's got a lot of similar stuff either already in existence or on the way. Kubeflow's native to GCP. I've read that they're going to be using Feast as their feature store. It's supposed to have been like done this year, I thought, but in either case, I'm sure Azure's working on some stuff too. So all the clouds are, definitely investing a ton of time and money into these things for very good reason. Because I think if you can't get these other practices right in ML ops, it's going to be really difficult to have successful machine learning. And all these clouds are banking on machine learning as being the killer app,
Right.
the killer application in the cloud. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you see two big trends here. So one I would call is the continuum of analytics to machine learning. As you mentioned data wrangler right on AWS. Well, many ML engineers would kind of turn their noses up at that. But the reality is that, as we frequently say, you have to have good BI, you have to have good analytics to have good machine learning. And so I think the clouds are learning to focus on building the analytics foundations. And then the integration part is all these little components and bits and pieces that you need to have sound data ops and sound ML ops. And so things like feature stores and endpoints. And so they're trying to create the tools that allow analysts to maintain data quality. And then there's just continuum, all the pieces that allow you to keep the whole machine running to actually have, for example, a recommender that gets updated on a regular basis and doesn't make massive mistakes because of data quality issues.
yeah, I think the other big thing to look for is I think more advances in structured data machine learning.
Yeah.
So that seems to have been sort of where everyone was surprisingly. By everyone, I mean the big clouds, right? So if you kind of look carefully, the things they're releasing, and promoting first for like cloud vision APIs, image recognition, video detection, NLP, those sorts of things. The ones that you noticed weren't as available were things that had to do with tabular data. So I know Amazon's machine learning product, that was like one of the first that came out, but then it was supplanted by SageMaker, and Google didn't really have an equivalent product until ML tables, but even then that was still in preview for quite a while. I think it's just recognition that maybe uh, you know, tabular data is a tougher problem to solve, but yet businesses have a lot of tabular data. Um, so I think you're going to see a lot more advancements in that area as well. I was just reading a paper about a TabNet, which was Google's new algorithm for tabular data because recognition is deep learning kind of sucks on tabular data. The old methods tend to work pretty well, but how would you combine deep learning and more classical tree-based methods? And so I think that's one trend to look for. The other trend would be the notion of tabular data, SQL. So SQL used to be a four-letter word with data scientists, like they were somehow just above SQL. That's going to be, I think you're going to see more people using it. So
Yeah, I mean, I really hope that we see improving SQL skills amongst data scientists and ML engineers in 2021. Sometimes the state of those skills can be quite deplorable. And especially now that we're storing big data in systems that use SQL, like BigQuery and Snowflake, this is becoming more and more important. I think at the height of the Hadoop craze, you could argue that maybe you really didn't need to know SQL because it wasn't going to help you that much when you were recording your data lake on-prem. But now SQL is basically the only way to get that data. And if you don't know SQL, then you're going to end up expending way more energy than you need to writing complex jobs to do data quality checks and pre-filtering and other things that are key to machine learning pipelines. If you're really good at SQL, then you can dramatically reduce that friction and then focus on the ML part more and not spend so much time just writing basic transformations and such.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're starting to see sort of the melding of the two as well. Like BigQuery ML was an early example of this, where you could write machine learning code in your SQL statements in BigQuery. That was pretty cool. At AWS reInvent, you just saw machine learning becoming a first-class citizen in all the databases, and I guess analytics tools like Athena and Redshift. Now you can utilize your SageMaker models directly in these traditionally SQL-based systems. So that's going to be interesting to see too. I mean, it's all TBD at this point, but I think it's a good evolution. So
yeah, and again, with I think the focus on value delivery amongst data scientists and data engineers, and machine learning engineers, which I hope continues to grow this year. Hopefully we'll see more adoption of these really quick, simple solutions that often can solve simple problems without a huge amount of effort. And then they can shift their real sophisticated efforts to harder problems within their companies, more domain specific problems. But yeah, off the shelf managed solutions integrated with databases and external to databases have a lot of potential if data scientists will use them.
Speaking of languages, I think Python is an interesting one. Python's now, by some accounts, the most popular programming language in the world, which, I mean, running a Python meetup for several years, I never thought I'd see the day, but here we are. So that's pretty cool to see. I am curious, though, what comes next, right? So like kind of the running joke in the Python community is Python's the second best language at everything. It does a lot of things okay. It's not the greatest. If you want performance, it's certainly not the best language to choose. And there's other languages. I've personally been spending some time in Swift, and I really like it a lot. It's performant. It gets a lot of things right. It borrowed a lot from Python in terms of syntactic sugar, but I'd say it's very powerful. And with respect to machine learning, you can write ML apps directly within Swift. I mean, the ML libraries are quite good, and TensorFlow has Swift libraries now and so forth.
Yeah.
So
It's
curious to see where the languages go.
Yeah.
R is also making a big comeback, right? So like that, a few years ago, that was sort of a Python just left it in the dust, and R is back now. That's crazy. So we'll see.
And then we have friends that argue that Go is going to be the next big thing. Go this year added generics, which that was a key blocker for wide data adoption. And so, maybe Go will become a huge language. The painful thing about Go is that you always have to think about concurrency. You can never ignore concurrency. The nice thing about Go is the concurrency is built in everywhere. And that's one of the biggest complaints about Python, right? Like, you can kind of scale it in various ways, but it's always painful to do. Scaling a machine is hard because you can't, you can't run true threads on multiple cores at the same time on a single Python process. Scaling to multiple machines is hard, and Go does all of those things extremely well out of the box.
Yeah, I mean, over the weekend I had this LinkedIn post where I said my Christmas peace on earth wish was that people would drop the language wars, and so I'll
Yeah.
still stick with that. But on that note though, it's also fascinating to kind of see where the languages go. And who knows? I mean, it's obvious for now, for the foreseeable future that Python is here to stay. I think both as a data
Question.
science language and increasingly as a data engineering language. That also wasn't the case. It used to be Java and Scala. Now it's, I used to hear people say, "Oh, real data engineers don't write in Python." And well, guess what? A lot of data engineers write in Python now. So
Yeah, and even we've talked a lot about cloud data warehousing and how cloud data warehouses are so powerful that you try to do as much as possible within the warehouse. Well, if you're not using Python pandas for data processing, maybe you're using Python for orchestration of SQL processes. I mean, there's so many different ways to attack a data engineering problem using Python.
and SQL,
Yeah,
with DBT, right? And increasingly, so cool. I
yeah.
think that covers a lot of the areas that I think we wanted to cover for top trends, for 2021. Anything else you want to add before we close out?
I think that's about it. I mean, I guess the thing I'd add with Python on the closeout here is that at this point, it's kind of the new Java almost, right? Like it sort of has nowhere to go but down. But we'll see. Maybe it will go from strength to strength, or maybe some of these other upstart competitors like Swift will grab market share from it in the traditional data science and ML spaces.
Yeah, I know, and I know personally for the next couple of years, I got to be, um, super into Python because Salt Lake City was just announced as the host for PyCon for 2022 and 2023. So really excited to see that, and really excited to also serve as sort of an ambassador for Salt Lake with the meetups that we run, the Salt Lake City Python meetup. To be clear, so yeah, I mean, we'll regardless of whatever happens with Python, I know I got into the language just because it's really pleasant to write and it's just fun. So I'm excited to see the growth, and again, also excited to see that our hometown is now going to be hosting a big Python convention if conventions are a thing in 2022. So we'll see.
We're
But
trending at the moment, so we'll see if that continues.
yeah, right. Well, awesome. Well, cool. I think that about covers it. So we'll see you next Monday, and have a good week and have a fun New Year. We'll see you
Yeah.
next year.
Happy New
So
Year.
yeah, right.